Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati Bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. This evening, we're so pleased to welcome the editors and contributors to the lyric essay as Resistance, Truth from the Margins to our At Home with Literati series. Just a quick webinar overview for those of you who are just joining us. The chat is closed, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase this anthology from Literati Bookstore throughout the event. And live transcription is available to you on your toolbar using the CC icon. If you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books in the description directly below me. You can also click on the little typewriter icon on the bottom right corner of the screen to subscribe to our channel and be kept up to date with all of our At Home with Literati events once they become available on our channel. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we'd just like to thank you for your attendance this evening, or this morning, or much later this evening, or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. To start us off tonight, I'm going to introduce the editors of this collection, and they're going to read from the introduction. Zoe Bossier is a gender fluid writer from Tucson, Arizona. She received her doctorate in creative nonfiction and in rhetoric and composition from Ohio University. She's the managing editor of Brevity, a journal of concise literary nonfiction, and co-editor of its anthology, The Best of Brevity. She also hosts a podcast interviewing nonfiction writers about their debut books for the New Book Network's New Books in Literature channel. And Erica Gerbold is the author of 5 Points, winner of the inaugural Deborah Tall Lyric Essay Book Prize. Her lyric essays appear in Brevity, The Rumpus, Passages North, The Collages, South Dakota Review, and Seneca Review. She received her Master of Fine Arts from Oregon State University. Erica currently writes and teaches in Central Virginia, where she's an assistant professor at Sweetbriar College. To start us off, please welcome Zoe and Erica.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Literati. We're really thrilled to be here tonight and to share our anthology, The Lyric Essay as Resistance, along with 3 of our amazing contributors. So to kick us off, Erica and I, are going to read our introduction, which was written by both of us from our various perspectives. So we will alternate reading. So I'm going to begin and then pass it off to Erica, who will pass it back to me, and so on and so forth.
Yay.
Once the lyric essay did not have a name, or it was called by many names. More a quality of writing than a category, the form lived for centuries in the private zuhitsu journals of Japanese court ladies, the melodic folk tales told by marketplace troubadours, and the subversive prose poems penned by the European romantics.
Before I came to lyric essays, I came to writing. When my teacher asked the class to write a story for homework, I couldn't believe my luck. But in response to my first attempt, she wrote in the margins, "This is cliché." As a first-generation college student, I was afraid I didn't know how to tell a story properly, that my mind didn't work that way, that I didn't belong in a college classroom, wasn't a real writer. And yet, language pulled me. Alone in my dorm room, I arranged and rearranged words, whispered them aloud until the cadences pleased me, their smooth sounds like prayers. I had no name for what I was writing then, but it felt like a style I could call my own. While the origins of the lyric essay predate its naming, the most well-known attempt to categorize the form came in 1997, when writers John DeGata and Deborah Tall, co-editors of Seneca Review, noticed a new genre in the submission queue. Not quite poetry, but neither quite narrative. This form between forms seemed to ignore the conventions of prose writing, such as linear chronology, narrative, and plot, in favor of embracing more liminal styles, moving by association rather than story, dancing around unspoken truths, devolving into a swirling series of digressions. DeGata and Tall's proposed term for this kind of writing, the lyric essay, stuck. And in the ensuing decade, the phrase would be adopted by many essayists to describe the kind of writing they do.
As a gender fluid writer and as a writing teacher, I've always appreciated the lyric essay as a literary beacon amid turbulent narrative waves, a means to cast light on negative space, to illuminate subjects that defy the conventions of traditional essay writing. Introducing this writing style to students is among my favorite course units. Semester after semester, the students most drawn to the lyric essay tend to be those who enter the classroom from the margins, whose perspectives are least likely to be included on course reading lists. Since its naming, the lyric essay has existed in an almost paradoxical space, at once celebrated for its unique characteristics, while also relegated to the margins of creative nonfiction. Perhaps because of this contradiction, much of the conversation about the lyric essay, the definition of what it is and does, where it fits on the spectrum of nonfiction and poetry, whether it has a place in literary journals and in the creative writing classroom, remains unsettled, extending into the present.
I thought getting accepted into a graduate program meant I had finally opened the gilded, solid oak doors of academia, a place no one in my family, not a parent, an aunt or uncle, a sibling or cousin, had ever seen the other side of. But at my cohort's first meeting in a state 1,000 miles from home, I understood I was still on the outside of something. "Are you sure you write lyric essays?" the other writers asked. "What does that even mean?" The acceptance of the lyric form seems to depend largely on who is writing it. The essays that tend to thrive in dominant culture spaces like academia or publishing are often written by writers who already occupy those spaces. This may be part of why, despite its expansive nature, many of the most widely anthologized, widely read, and widely taught lyric essays represent a narrow range of perspectives, most often those of the center.
To name the lyric essay, to name anything, is to construct rules about what an essay called lyric should look like on the page, should examine in its prose, even whom it should be written by. But this categorization has its uses too. Much like when a person openly identifies as queer, identifying an essayistic style as lyric provides a blueprint for others on the margins to name their experiences, a form through which to speak their truths. The center is, by definition, a limited perspective, capable of viewing only itself. In Marginality as a Site of Resistance, Bell Hooks positions the margins not as a state, quote, one wishes to lose or to give up or surrender as part of moving into the center, but rather as a site one stays on, clings to even, because it nourishes one's capacity to resist. To write from the margins is to write from the perspective of the whole, to see the world from both the margins and the center.
I graduated with a manuscript of lyric essays, one that coalesced into my first book. That book went on to win a prize judged by John D'Agata and named for Deborah Tall. I had finally found my footing, unlocked that proverbial door, but skepticism followed me in. On my book tour, I was invited to read at my alma mater alongside another writer whose nonfiction tackled pressing social issues with urgency, empathy, and wit. I read an essay about home and friendship, about being young and the hard lessons of growing up. After the reading, we fielded a Q&A. The dean of my former college raised his hand. "I can see what work the other writer is doing quite clearly," he said. "But what exactly is the point of yours?" Writing is never a neutral act. Although a rallying slogan from a different era and cause, the maxim, "the personal is political," still applies to the important work writers do when they speak truth to power, call attention to injustice, and advocate for social change. Because the lyric essay is fluid, able to occupy both marginal and center spaces, it is a form uniquely suited to telling stories on the writer's terms, without losing sight of where the writer comes from and the audiences they are writing toward. When we tell the stories of our lives, especially when those stories challenge assumptions about who we are, it is an act of resistance.
Many of the contemporary LGBTQIA+ essayists I teach in my classes write lyrical prose to capture queer experience on the page. Their works reckon with non-binary family building and parenthood, the ghosts of trans Midwestern origin, coming of age in a queer Black body, the overwhelming epidemic of transmisogyny and gendered violence. The lyric essay is an ideal container for these stories, each a unique prism, reflecting the ambiguous, messy, and ever-evolving processes through which we as queer people come to understand ourselves. Lyric essays rarely stop to provide directions, instead mapping the reader on a journey into the writer's world toward an unknown end. Along the way, the reader learns to interpret the signs, begins to understand that the roadblocks and potholes and detours, those gaps, the words left unspoken on the page, are as important as the essay's destination.
The lyric essays that have taught me the most as a writer never showed their full hand. Each became its own puzzle with secrets to unlock. When the text on the page was obscured, the essay taught me to fill in the blanks. When the conflict didn't resolve, I realized irresolution might be its truest end. When the segments of the essay seemed unconnected, I learned to read between the lines. The most powerful lyric essays reclaim silence from the silencers, becoming a space of agency for writers whose experiences are routinely questioned, flattened, or appropriated. Readers from the margins, those who have themselves been silenced, recognize the game. The 20 contemporary lyric essays in this volume embody resistance through content, style, design, and form, representing a broad spectrum of experiences that illustrate how identities can intersect, conflict, and even resist one another. Together, they provide a dynamic example of the lyric essay's range of expression, while showcasing some of the most visionary contemporary essayists writing in the form today. These stories are complex, and they don't always have tidy or happy endings. The experiences they depict may not be immediately relatable or accessible to every reader, but our hope for the lyric essay as resistance, truth from the margins, is for every voice to speak without compromise, to nourish the capacity for a new generation of lyric essayists to take up the important work of resistance. Thank you so much for being here, and to our fabulous contributors, Cami and Crystal and Wendy, for sharing some of this work with you.
Thank you, Zoe and Erica. Our first reader, Crystal Wilkinson, a recent fellowship recipient of the Academy of American Poets, is Kentucky's poet laureate. She's the award-winning author of Perfect Black, a collection of poems, and 3 works of fiction, The Birds of Opulence, Water Street, and Blackberries, Blackberries. Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts, a culinary memoir, is forthcoming from Clarkson Potter Penguin Random House. She currently teaches at the University of Kentucky, where she is professor of English in the MFA Creative Writing program. Please join me in welcoming Crystal Wilkinson.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zoe and Erica, for this anthology. I'm very glad to be a part of it. Thank you, John and Literati Bookstore and Wayne State Press. A meditation on grief, things we carry, things we remember. I remember this place where burdens wash away in the dark and mothers' dresses float like blossoms. The boy drowns, his head turned toward home, body facing the farmer's house where the girl who loves him sleeps. She is the farmer's daughter. They say she is the one who hit his head, the one who hoisted the rock, the one who watched his blood ooze out. This is the way you wash your clothes in the creek. This is the way you catch catfish in deep water. The mothers stand in water to their knees, their dresses wafting out like sheets on a line. On the creek bank, a child runs circles, catching the wind, and the mother's dresses float like blossoms. The mothers sing prayers for the boy's mother who looks out her kitchen window and cries. The circle of mothers in the water whispers a prayer for the girl who tells all who will listen that she loved the boy who died. Her mother stands in the backyard, her hand on the chopping hoe with tears streaming down her face. The fathers brood in the fields, walking slow as lepers, hearts and houses filled with grief. I almost drowned once. My grandmother's dress blossomed around her like a sail. She was my John boat in the creek. My mother stood on the shore, frozen with fear, my father's name mute on her tongue, his kiss spoiled fruit in her young, sweet mouth. That dead boy's ghost haunts this place, dark water flowing like a deacon's robe. On nights spoiled with teenage trouble, I went to the creek and waited for the boy, hoping he would listen. Do you dream of the farmer's daughter? I asked. Are you sorry for what you've done? He didn't answer. They say he raped the girl, but I wasn't afraid of him. By then, I had been raped too and was becoming a dangerous woman. I waited for him and held court with the moon. I'm here, I said. Let's get this done. In this place where burdens washed away, I stood, my dress flowering, floating. I was drowning too. My face turned toward home, my black body facing my father's house where my mother cried for me. They say the boy was handsome, but I never saw him in the flesh. At night, the creek did scare me. It's a rush like a boy's whispered threat in a girl's ear. But here, the mothers are always standing with water to their knees, their dresses billowing out like sheets on a line, praying because there was always something roaring in those trees, teeth gnashing, fathers killing boys for the sake of their daughters, eyes always watching, eyes always glistening in the dark.
Thank you. Our next reader is Wendy S. Walters. Wendy is Associate Professor in the Writing Program of the School of the Arts at Columbia University, where she directs the nonfiction concentration. She's the author of 2 books of poems, and a book of prose, Multiply, Divide, on the American Real and Surreal. With Elise Nelson, she co-edited the volume, Fictions of Emancipation. She's completing a book about white paint forthcoming. Please join us in welcoming Wendy S. Walters.
Thank you, John, and Literati. And that was an amazing reading. Thank you, Crystal. Wow, I'm a little enervated. Just so happy to be here with you all, and thank you to Zoe and Erica for this super disciplined project. I'm going to read a piece called Water Courses and just trying to keep track of the time. So. Before I saw the pictures of the cars submerged in water at a dip in the interstate, or the trucks pumping water out of the warehouse basements near the river, my mother described how low the water table had been all year, how the region had been on the verge of a drought. She said the rain had been needed, though no one expected so much of it to fall all at once. In the morning, my sister and I went for a walk by the river. I told her she was not drinking enough water. I said I wanted her to take better care of her own health, not just to focus on everyone else in her family. We were surprised to see the street strewn with wood chips and the flood still receding. That day, it was still easy to pretend that we did not understand the magnitude of the change, how soon it would happen again, how far beyond the riverfront the water had traveled inland, without regard for the lines drawn on the map, the boundaries of municipality. I lectured my sister, but my own health had been suffering for nearly 3 years. I sought a diagnosis, occasionally giving up on feeling better between appointments with specialists. My symptoms had been complicated, but they were also consistent. I also had the sense that my doctors were not listening to me, were not recognizing my pain as something that could be addressed through efforts beyond my own. This is not the point of the story, but I need to be clear that I was talking to them about agony, not discomfort. By the next day, most of the streets by the riverfront had been swept clean, and the remaining evidence of the flood, at least on the street level, was hard to see. But I heard reports on the local news about wet basements, concerns about mold growing deep in the walls. It was so bad that the president promised to come and survey the damage. This was also an opportunity for him to connect with some of the people who did not vote for him, who might vote for him the next time. In the coming weeks, the Supreme Court would allow one more state to continue with their plans to restrict access to voting, and I felt despair about these limits to citizenship. What frustrated me in the moment was my inability to imagine the future, a skill I had always relied on in my times of deep concern. I never expected my vision of the future to be predictive or correct, but I did believe the space of imagination could help me to endure the harsh facts of the moment. Dan and I went for a walk down by the river, and it was crowded with people. There were several new babies who could barely hold their heads up. A dragonfly landed on my shirt and rested there for nearly a quarter of a mile. In the evening, my sister sent me a picture from the lake. In the light of the car's headlights, there were thousands of mayflies. They don't have mouths because they don't eat. Most will not live more than a day. The female ones die within 5 hours. I wrote to apologize to a student for my delayed response to their message and to confess I was dealing with a family emergency. What I didn't say was that the emergency was mine, that I had spent the night in the emergency room for a chronic condition I don't regularly discuss. I was suffering from a problem of volume, the anguish of swelling and receding. In the hospital, I distracted myself by listening to other people's pain, most of which was more acute than mine. One man had cracked his skull open in a fall and needed surgery. His brain was okay, the doctor assured him. A young couple suspected they had contracted COVID, though despite their discomfort, they remained uninterested in the vaccine. In the late hours, another man pleaded in hunger for fish sticks. I appreciated the specificity of his desire. After I awoke the next day, I felt guilty because I knew I would not be able to get much done. I am always working and I am always behind. Another student wrote with a minor request, and again, I felt compelled to answer right away. But still, I felt weak and could barely stand. I needed to sleep, but I did not try to make myself comfortable. The rain stopped and the sun came out, but I could still smell a restlessness in the air. Elsewhere, there had been catastrophic heat all summer, sparking fires and many deaths, especially in northern cities where people do not yet know how to live with it. A few days later, while working at the kitchen table, a small brown rabbit came all the way up to the front door before I saw it. When it noticed me, it was neither afraid nor distracted from its own curiosity. Dan watched a pheasant strutting up the drive, but when we got to get a closer look at it, it ran down the road with the accuracy of an arrow. The fact is that I was still wobbly, not just due to the facts of my body, but also due to the vagaries of my intentions, which were vexed thanks to my sense of foreboding about the future. The next few days were hot and humid, but then once again, we expected several days of thunderstorms, 6 in a row as far as the meteorologist predictions assessed. There was water in the air, humidity, but also a heaviness of understanding. I mean that the water was saying something I didn't understand. I worried I would never understand. I do know that all water is related to itself, no matter what lines of belonging we draw for it on the map. I also know that everywhere people live, there are waterways buried, rivers that have been biding time to resurfacing, water courses long paved over for the sake of industry and convenience. Where these undercurrents flow is often revealed only after a flood. Once it recedes, it can seem as though it will be gone forever. I knew better, but still I had to remind myself not to forget. Maybe it was the water in the air that made me feel dumb, as logic and anxiety swam around in my consciousness. When I went to get my prescription filled, I realized the ER doctor had incompletely notated my diagnosis, which I explained to her at the intake with great care. Given that the treatment I was under was for a chronic condition, she listed only one of my symptoms, the easiest one to spell. Even though I showed her test results from my most recent diagnosis, I explained my pending surgery, but she wrote nothing about it down. She authorized blood work I did not want done, tests I did not consent to. I thought about her dumb hand searching inside of me for the relief of recognition in my parts, all accounted for. Days later, I was still ashamed to have met her with compassion and understanding for the stress she must have felt that night. I felt disappointed in myself for not having responded to her coldly or with disdain. I became a reservoir of anger that night, possibly misdirected, but it was raining again. The 2 mosquito bites on my arms were inflamed. I realized, not for the first time, that my favorite color is the blue-gray of clouds passing by after an early evening storm. I complained to Dan about all I needed to get done before the summer's end, all the necessary steps each task required, and he said that there were too many things, that I was flooding him. It was raining again. The street parallel to ours was already full of water. So was the one after that. On the local news, there was talk of the cars submerged on the interstate once again. There was even a clip of a man driving his van into a large puddle and then abandoning it once he realized he could not make it through. He laughed when the newscaster reached him to ask, "What were you thinking?" The man said, "I thought I could make it," which is probably what we will all think at some point soon. When the rain began the next day or the day after that, to be honest, I was starting to lose track at this point. I saw the brown rabbit calmly resting under a broad leaf in the middle of the empty lot next to the door. I remembered rabbit fur is coated in lanolin, which keeps them from truly feeling wet, unlike its predators who may have sought shelter beneath the porches or in the drain pipes. Why hide from the weather with those who might do you in if you're lucky enough to be unbothered by the rain? Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Our final reader of the night, Camellia Berrygrass, is trying to live. Presently in Philadelphia, she is the author of Hall of Waters, a 2019 nominee for the Krauss Essay Prize. Her essays and poems have been widely published in places such as Diagram, the Texas Review, Barrel House, and Waxwing, among others. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alabama and has taught most recently in the MFA program for creative writing at Rosemont College. Please welcome her to Literati virtually.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. My little ring light power went out, so it's a little darker than I intended. Oh, what an honor to be a part of this event and to be on a panel with Wendy and Crystal. That's tremendous to me. And Erica and Zoe, thank you so much for all the labor you put into in editing and wrangling all of us for this really wonderful. I can't wait to personally teach from this and then just like not tell my students that I'm in it, like, 'cause that's not the reason at all why I'd be teaching it. The material throughout the anthology is why I want to teach it. And thank you, John and Literati, for your labor in hosting this event. I have to give some context for this essay because I've never read it aloud because it's very visual. I'm gonna hold it up to the screen. It's in the shell, as we might say, of a very specific document that I saw a lot of when researching my book, Hall of Waters. The kind of document is a Missouri Department of Natural Resources State Historic Preservation Office site survey form for if a town or just a citizen of the state of Missouri wants to offer up a building for the historical record, for historical building status officially in the state of Missouri, there's a site survey form that has to be filled out as part of that process to have that building be considered. And I was researching my hometown. This book, Hall of Waters, is a book of lyric essays mostly where I'm just trying to say something true about the American Midwest, specifically through my hometown in rural Missouri. And there happens to be a lot of historic buildings in this town because it was an old mineral water town. But I kept reading all these forms and I got to thinking, well, you know, what would it look like if the places that I survived as a queer kid growing up. If the places that my mom survived, or so many women survive in this country, survive sites of quotidian domestic violence and abuse, and foreshortened lives because of the constraints of patriarchy. What would it look like for those struggles and those survivals to be considered, worthy of the historical record? That's the thinking behind me taking this document shell and trying to play with it. So it's about one of the houses I lived in growing up, the address 902 Sunset Strip in my town of Excelsior Springs, Missouri. And it's mostly a very straightforward filling out of this kind of document, except that I kind of explode and inject it with lyric essayness at various points. And so let's see how this goes as an audio experience, and not the visual experience it was intended for. This could be fun. All right. Architectural survey form, 902 Sunset Strip. Survey number CLAS 718, survey name, Excelsior Springs Historic Resources, county, Clay, address 902 Sunset Strip, city, Excelsior Springs. Historic name, if known, Grass Residence, Garden House, Connie's House, the one with the bird feeders, twice yearly garage sale, Flamingo Flock, Connie's Bar and Grill, present/other name, if known. It's not Connie's anymore. Ownership, private. Historic use, if known. Horror and refuge. It was wet with booze breath and then verdant with root growth, less desperate than it was decorated. Current use? Unknown. After Mom passed, the property changed owners. An unfamiliar red truck visible in the driveway on Google Maps, renovated with white shiplap, all the music taken out of it. Historical information. Construction date, 1971. Architect, not applicable. Significant date or period, 1992 to 2016. Builder or contractor, not applicable. Areas of significance: agriculture, health/medicine, law. Original or significant owner, Connie Grass. Roof material, asphalt shingle. Chimney placement, offset left. Architectural style, split level ranch style. Structural system, wood frame. Plan shape, rectangular. Exterior wall cladding, brick and lumber. Number of stories, 1 front 2. Foundation material, unknown. Number of bays, first floor, 7. Basement type, full. Roof type, truncated hip. Front porch type/placement, platform. Endangered by, drought, flood. Current owner, redacted. Form prepared by the woman who had an odd boyhood here with a name that no longer fits. Survey date, 2018. Photographer of the picture. Google Street View, date October 2013. Description: fall color masks the state of browning, the wilting walls of plants cradling every post, a long makeshift fence of bushes, nothing upright without plants encircling its base. Additional information. Description of primary resource. The bedroom of the oldest child was sky blue for a number of years, but was painted black during their adolescence. After moving out, it became a peach-hued museum hosting Connie's collection of concert photos and musicians' autographs. Its final stage was a Thomas the Tank Engine themed room for Connie's grandson. The basement, nominally a recreation room, was a mixture of lime green paint and wood paneling. The music museum took its place down here when Connie's youngest child had a son. The museum expanded. The front room and kitchen first took on an American Southwest / Arizona Highways magazine feel, with sandy colored walls and framed images of buttes and mesas. It would, as if a drought reversed, become greener and greener over the years as plants and framed pictures of Ann Getty's photography replaced the more arid decorations. Its final stage was an embrace of Florida Keys chic, seashore village romanticism, and Margaritaville-style resort town aesthetics. The garage was never used to store vehicles. It hosted garage sales once, sometimes twice a year for necessary supplemental income. Connie would try to sell any and every toy or shirt that wasn't getting frequent use. If the contents of the home are self-expression, the garage served as a way to store expressive acts that no longer served a use, a warehouse of discarded desire. The present occupants of the home have painted every room white and gray mauve. White shiplap blankets the entryway and kitchen. New faux marble countertops and quaint country fixtures adorn the kitchen. Everything looks as if draped by the veil of a ghost. Description of environment and outbuildings. Home located in a late 1960s or early 1970s subdivision on the westernmost part of town. The subdivision, not formally named, was built around Peachtree Street, Dogwood Street, Apple Blossom Street, Michelle Street, Milwaukee Street, and Miss Bell Street. It was intended to be a more affordable neighborhood compared to the more deluxe planned subdivision in western Excelsior Springs, known as King's Addition, which was next to the hospital. Home is located near the Canadian Pacific Railway line, which ran through thick forest that could take you all the way to Salem Road past city limits. The train would shake the walls of the house and the jewel tea dishes would rattle, and it was a reminder that it was possible to move forward, to leave. Home had consistent yellow paint with blue trim. Home was in the middle of a short block of 3 homes total. Connie Grass had made a de facto fence for the front-facing side of the property by planting a wide variety of plants along each property line, a deliberate differentiation from the well-kept lawns and lack of front fencing in the rest of the neighborhood. It is unclear whether the plants were there for her protection or for the protection of her neighbors. History and significance. Because to voice the desire to escape would only bring his fist. Desire disturbs the air in the house, thickens the place like rue, and Dad would squat and squat as if clearing smoke. In the Midwest, we value the privacy of the domestic sphere. Adults can do whatever they want as long as they keep it in the privacy of their own bedroom, say all the good men and women in town, over their shoulders to their children, at even the slightest hint of queerness. They lump queerness in with the actual perils they allow the home to cover up: the screaming, the recycling full of aluminum cans, the shattered plates, the craters in the drywall. The significance of this house is the lesson that nothing private stays. You can only live in town for so long before other people's parents hear about your dad's drinking. You can only go to school for so long before people begin to wonder about the bruises. Life in the rural Midwest is a timeline of when private experiences are made public. Only your internality can escape. We moved into 902 Sunset Strip from a castle gray box on North Kimball because my parents wanted more room for me and my brother, or maybe just for herself. My mom painted our front room clay orange and hung southwestern landscapes on the walls. And was she meant to say to me, to everyone in the house, even my dad, every neighbor that visited, what she meant by this was, I have been depleted by this man and this life, but I will raise these children and I will teach my students. I want more than what I have. I am emptied, but I am vast. And when the orange gave way to pea pod green, she was speaking to us again. I will outlive you because unlike you, there is bloom in me yet. In the years after the divorce, my mom would begin to plant shrubs and perennials and tomatoes and big blossoms around the entire perimeter of the property, lining every bit of fence with something green. And I know she was making friends on music message boards. And I know from reading her journals after she passed away that she was dating. And I know that her reputation in town was turning around from the teacher with the awful husband and the woman who runs the best garage sale in town to the wild plant lady. But this was all speech, if unvoiced, seeds planted and soil nurtured and speech harvested. She was trying to tell us that she was growing. By the time she told me about her cancer diagnosis, the front room and the bedroom and the kitchen had taken on a beach theme. New England shore kitsch lined the shelves in the kitchen, and the other rooms were inspired by these Floridian aesthetics. We never really made the time to talk about how scared she was or how she felt about dying. But she was telling me something by manifesting this shell and sea spray around her. She was saying, this is where I hope to be soon, one way or another, on the edge of worlds, and with politeness towards the waves, finally taken in. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Cami. I hope I must feel the same way as all of our viewers do, where I'm just so blown away by these readings and the power and breadth that this form provides. And we're so honored as a bookstore to be able to be a space for you all to hear this work and hopefully buy this collection and this anthology, which you can do from our store via links in the chat, and if you're watching on YouTube, and the links directly below me. But thanks again to all of our readers for joining us this evening, and to the editors of this anthology, Zoe and Erica. Congratulations. I think this reading is a testament to how brilliant and necessary this anthology is to readers. So thank you all for being here, and to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.